Welcome to another episode of Inquiring Minds. I'm Steve Harper, and with me, as always, is the incredible Donna Carlin. Donna, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I cannot wait for this segment.
I'm me either. Let's dive in. What are we talking about today?
Everyone's non favorite subject about perfection, and we've delved into it in a few different perspectives. But this one is perfection is the silent dream stealer.
Steeler. Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. So, in the word perfection, right? I was told one time by a former business partner that perfection is the enemy of good enough, right? And always
Right.
trying to do the everything exactly right to make it perfect, which means that sometimes you don't actually produce anything. I remember when I actually first got into writing. I never wanted to share anything because I knew it wasn't exactly right. And I wasn't happy with it. I was always tweaking, always adjusting. And then eventually I think my wife said one day, are you going to let anybody read it, anything you're going to do? Or are you just doing it for yourself? And I'm like, no, it's not perfect. And she's like, will it ever be perfect? And it was a really powerful statement at the time because I realized how many things I do in my personal and my professional life that I've always had to try and drive to a level of perfection set in my own mind, with my own story, and how many times that has led me down the path of never producing anything.
And never being happy with what it is that you do produce.
Yes.
That's the other thing. That's why it is a silent dream stealer, because when you have a dream, think about it for a moment. Everything is in technicolor. Like it just gives you joy because a
Yep.
dream is literally a vision that you're going to move towards or not. We talked about in a previous episode, how to honor dreams. But here, if you strive for perfection, you're not going to go after that dream because it's never going to measure up to the joy and fulfillment that you feel just having that dream.
Yeah,
And so it just stops you dead.
that's
Instead
true.
of understanding that if you start on something, whether it's a piece of writing, Steve, or whatever else, and I want to get back to that in a second, um, going after your dream and not striving for perfection, but to realize the dream and whatever form it'll end up taking will give you an incredible sense of joy and fulfillment.
Yes.
When it comes to looking at um, not not shipping, not producing,
Yep.
just ship it, as Seth Godin would say, then what you're doing is also holding back from the rest of the world and the impact you potentially could have on them by not being out there.
Yes. Well, you mentioned Seth Godin. I mean, he has a really good description, especially for those of us like myself that actually isn't, are in the software industry, right? Getting that first iteration out, people worry about it's ugly, it's not practical, or it doesn't do everything that we want it to eventually do. And he's like, that's okay, right? You have to get it out there because that's how people give you feedback. That's how you understand what, if you're building something, what people need. And what changes need to be made. And you only get that by putting it out there, the ugly version out there. And I find that, I've experienced it personally. I've seen it professionally, especially with a lot of my coaching clients, that there is this resistance to uh, hitting some, predetermined line of perfection before anybody gets anything out. Whether, like you said, it's writing, it's, creating a piece of art, it's, producing a piece of software, or launching a new business. And
Mhm.
people feel like it has to be perfect or they're not going to be accepted by others, and it's really quite the opposite.
And who's measuring perfect?
Yeah.
It's going to be accepted by so many people because they don't know what your definition of perfect is.
Yeah.
Think about that for a moment. And if it has impact on them, do they care that it's not pretty or it isn't absolutely perfect? No, they care that it has impact on them
That's
and
right.
that it's made a difference for them and it's taught them something or helped them grow in some way, shape, or form. They don't really care. It's you that's really standing in your own way of doing something to achieve a dream that you have. And what in the world are you doing to yourself?
Absolutely. And you're famous for this. When you find yourself as an individual feeling like, it's just not ready, it's just not right, it's just, something is holding you back from pushing it out or shipping it, as we were kind of talking about relative to Seth. You always are known for asking those questions. So I would pose it back to our listeners to say, what is holding you back? Why? What is the issue for getting this version right here, right now, out in front of people, so that you could get that kind of feedback, get that input that you're going to need in order to refine and adjust. But to your point, you have to ask that question, but then you also have to understand who's defining perfect. Is that you? Or, and is that what you believe, the story that you're telling yourself in your head, that other people set a standard for what this is? Or where are those inputs coming from? And I don't think a lot of people stop enough to think about that. It's like, well, if you put it that way, yeah, no, you're right, I probably should put this out there, I should get some feedback, or I should send it over to my publisher, or I should, whatever the issue might be. You start to think, yeah, I'm that anxiety is coming from some unknown fears that really haven't really been quantified yet.
That's it. Or you're working with a publisher who keeps telling you it's not perfect enough and the punctuation is wrong and the grammar is wrong, even though you come from a different country and you have a different style of speaking, and the corrections that keep getting thrown at you are so, they become so ridiculous that it loses the flavor of the piece in the first place.
Yeah,
And instead of going to perfect, it's literally detrimental to the product. And that's when you ask yourself the question, what's going on here? Like, what's really going on here? And for me, publishing, it was my first book. It was a nightmare because of that, and it wasn't perfect enough and needed to change to the point of losing the trust of the people that I was highlighting in the book, and my
yeah,
reputation being destroyed. And I'm saying to myself, is an extra comma here and there worth my reputation, or changing a word from cashier or cash to cashier really going to make that much difference to delay a book by 2 years? And that's when you stop and say no, it's time to fire the publisher and do what you know is right and get it out there.
yeah,
And it's there's two things. One is the perfection, that lens that you look through for yourself.
yep,
And the other is, who are you trusting to put those parameters on you?
exactly. I
And
love that.
if yeah, and if they're telling you that you're not perfect enough, it's time to surround yourself with a different crowd of people.
Yeah. I love that. I'm interviewing somebody from my other podcast show, and she's a info product individual, and she's just a dynamo entrepreneur. And she happened to mention to me, she's launching a product actually this week, and I had been on the site just to get some perspective of this new program that she's launching, and wanted to ask some specific questions around it. And she mentioned, you notice that on the site that there are typos and misspellings.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I did notice that. I didn't want to be like, that guy that was like, hey, did you know? She said, yeah. And she said, I took a first and second pass at that. She said, but I'm for my audience, they know that spelling and punctuation is not my thing, right? And when I have an idea, I just have to get it out. And so, it used to be I get it on paper. Now I get it out onto the web and I put it on these landing pages. And she said, I know that it isn't perfect and I don't care, because at the end of the day, the gist of it is people will forgive the imperfections because they're there for the meat of the content and what I'm doing and the program I'm offering. And I just thought, wow, that's invigorating to a certain degree, because it does give you permission to be messy, and it does give you permission to not overthink it or worry about it. Obviously there are certain contexts where that probably would not apply. Obviously submitting that for your dissertation for your PhD is probably not a good idea to
Not a
have
good
those
thing. Yeah.
that kind of writing without the appropriate punctuation and spelling checked. But at the end of the day, I really felt it was quite interesting for her, because what she said was, and you know what, I'll have 1,000 people sign up for this, program. with no problem. And she said that means that's $100,000 of revenue to her with the imperfections. And it's just interesting because we're talking about this topic, how that's somebody who is successful and going forward and not worrying about the outcomes. And to our, sort of the subject of today's conversation is she used to be caught up in those things. In fact, she almost didn't go into her career path because she was always told you couldn't do it. You couldn't be successful if you weren't perfect in every way. And she said she just finally threw caution to the wind and just started being herself. And that's when her list grew. That's when her fan base grew. And it was pretty powerful example of not letting perfection hold you back and steal that joy for what you're doing.
And you know what? You don't have to be perfect. What you need to do is contribute something that's unique to you,
Yes.
whether it's a thought, a sentence, a perspective, a direction, something that you learned over time, your wisdom. Doesn't matter. Your story, it really
Yeah.
doesn't matter. It does not have to be perfect because, again, perfect according to whom? Somebody will always find fault to something. And as we discussed, previously,
Yeah.
perfection is an end state. There's nothing after perfect. I don't know about you. I don't care how old I'm going to get. I want to make sure that I'm continuously learning. If I'm in a
Yes.
state of perfection, now what?
Yeah.
Nothing will ever measure up.
Yeah.
Nothing will ever be good enough. Nothing will ever, wow me in any way, shape, or form, because I'm always going to strive for that end result and absolutely not pay attention to the journey along the way. And I could tell you, I've had dreams over time that I've been steered away from because of life. And doesn't mean that you can't love something else. And if you're not
Yeah.
open to taking a different direction
That's
and
right.
seeing what that brings you, because it's usually what you've never experienced or imagined
Yeah.
before, and everything's got to be perfect, life's got to be perfect, whatever, you're in for a real disappointment.
Yes, you are. Absolutely. I find this just super interesting because, like I said, I used to feel that that responsibility and that pressure that perfection brings with it. And because of that, I missed a lot of key opportunities, I think, along the way throughout my career. And when I finally realized that, nobody expects perfection and you'll always have your critics no matter what, that
That's right.
if you, even if it is perfect, they'll find something to tell you is wrong with it. Then it's almost freeing for you to be able to say, well, you know what, I'm not going to let it steal my joy any longer. I'm going to put the work out, I'm going to put the effort in, I'm going to do the things that I think need to be done, and the right people will show up at the right time to embrace it. And if they don't, I'll keep trying. And I think from that perspective, I think that's a huge empowerment when you can reach that level and realize that you just got to keep putting in the work and keep doing what you need to be doing. And the perfection is actually in the process, not really necessarily in the output. You're perfecting the fact that you are guarding yourself from the naysayers and the negative talk that potentially is out there, but also in here. And once you
Hmm.
overcome that, it's incredibly empowering.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, give up, let go of the need to be perfect, and just have fun and dive into the deep end.
I love it. I love it. Dive into the deep end. And with that, Donna, how do people give us some feedback on this episode, what they took away from it, and how they've maybe overcome the sort of uh, that need to be perfect and ship it, if you will, like we talked about. How would they get involved and continue this conversation and enter into a dialogue with us for what their tips might be or what they took away from some of the tips we shared today?
We'll join our Facebook group at Inquiring Minds with Donna Carlin and Steve Harper and be a part of the conversation. We have all our past episodes up there, and we would love to hear from you what you want us to talk about, explore, expand upon, whatever. And through our website, Steve's at ripplecentral.com. I'm at donnacarlin.com, Carlin with a K. And you could get our email through there. You could see all our social media because we post all over the place, and be a part of our community, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. We'd love for you to be a part of that community. And offer up some suggestions on topics that might be more, pertinent to you, or things that you'd like us to continue the conversations on from our past episodes. The feedback that we receive from our audience is very important to us, and it sort of guides and directs us on what to cover next. So we certainly would appreciate that input. But Donna, this was a great conversation as always. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be on this episode and in this show with you, and to be able to have these conversations, because I learn something every single time we do these.
Me too. And I look forward to the next one.
Yep, me too. Well, you take care, and we'll be back again with another episode of Inquiring Minds.
Have a good one.